I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today on the show, I'm joined by Jeff Sturgis of Whitetail Habitat Solutions to discuss what he would do in a series of challenging deer hunting scenarios. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by First Light. And we're back today for another one of our What Would You Do podcasts. If you've heard these in the past, the basic gist is this. We're going to run our guests through a gauntlet of different, very specific scenarios and ask them what they would do in that situation. Why would they do that? How would they do that? This might be something like, imagine it's October 15th and we've got this wind direction, we've got these conditions, and you're in this state and this challenging thing happens. Now what? It's that kind of stuff. And I've found over the last year and a half that we've been doing these, this gets us a different level of insight into how these amazing deer hunters operate, how they think, how they go about deciding what to do and how to do it. I personally have found these to be some of the most valuable conversations I've had recently, and I'm hoping that you feel the same way. And today's guest, I think, is going to be right up there as far as the quality of all the other What You Do podcasts that we've done. We've got Jeff Sturgis. He's been on the podcast 3 times, maybe 4 times over the last 7-8 years. He's amazing. He is the author of several books. He runs the website and YouTube channel, Whitetail Habitat Solutions. He is a consultant. He has a tremendous amount of experience on the habitat management side and on the hunting side, whether that's private land or public land. He's done it all. He's got a great perspective on things. He hails from the upper Midwest, but he's hunted elsewhere too. I think you're really going to enjoy this. If you don't know Jeff yet, this is a great introduction to him. And with that said, I don't have much else for you. I think we should get into my conversation with Jeff. I've got some questions for him that I know you are going to be interested to hear his answer to. So thanks for listening, and here we go. All right, with me now from the road in the middle of the god-awful traffic of Chicago is Jeff Sturgis. Jeff, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mark. Always enjoy chatting with you, even if I'm driving through that gauntlet of Chicago.
I know how painful that can be, so I recognize the sacrifice you are making right now to try to balance that chaos with this conversation. So appreciate you making it all work.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Where are you heading towards? You doing a client visit? Is that right?
Actually going to the Huntwise crew over in Grand Rapids. They're a partner I work with very closely, so I'm driving over there. We have a dinner meeting tonight, and then we're shooting a bunch of videos in the morning, and I'm driving right back. So kind of 15 hours of round trip road traffic over today and tomorrow. Nice.
What do you do on a long road trip like that? A lot of people maybe listen to podcasts, hopefully this podcast, but what do you do?
Yeah.
Because you don't need to learn anything from the Wired to Hunt podcast. So what do you do?
Well, I do like listening to podcasts here and there, but one of the things I do is this is a great time to actually be on podcasts. So when I'm at home, a lot of times people want to do podcasts in the evening or on a weekend because they're doing something else during the day. Or for me, this is my full-time career. So I kind of like, if I'm at home, we're either shooting video, I'm working on the property, or I'm spending time with family, friends. So I really like doing these while I'm driving. Helps pass the time. And then I talk to people in the industry and friends. And so I think I'm on the phone usually when I'm traveling, 2/3 of the time, 75% of the time.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's a good time to get the phone calls taken care of when you don't really want to do them otherwise, and you've got to be in the field or doing stuff like that. This is a great way to make use of that road time.
Oh, it's a really good way. So that's it. And, like with you, I always enjoy making time for you and making sure this works out. But it does work out really well if it sounds okay, at least, to do this while on the road. So I listen to my music. I have my sports talk I like listening to. So there's all kinds of stuff. But
Nice.
not bad. It's like my mobile office.
I know, it's a pretty nice situation. Well,
Not too bad.
here's my game plan for this, Jeff. And this might be unfair because I'm going to run you through a gauntlet. And I'm going to run you through a gauntlet while you're already going through a gauntlet. So that's probably not kind of me. But
Like a double.
yeah, but I've got confidence.
It's kind of like clients. You can imagine with them face to face, they hit me with all kinds of questions. So
Yes.
not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes. So while you're dealing with the Chicago traffic, I'm going to run you through what we call the What Would You Do Gauntlet, where basically I'm going to outline a series of very specific situations and then, ask you to explain to me what you would do in that situation and what your thought process is, why it was that you would do this thing. So we'll kind of start with some habitat related things, move into some hunting season related things. And as we do often with these, feel free to get as deep into the weeds as you want. There's never a detail that's too far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
So
that sounds great.
I'm going to lay out a story for you, and then I'm going to pitch it to you, and then see what you think. Does that sound okay?
Okay. Yeah, it sounds really good.
All right. I think we just get right into it. So here's the first situation, Jeff. Let's imagine that you own a 40-acre square of property. And let's say this is in north-ish Wisconsin. It's mostly big timber. That part of Wisconsin's got a lot of timber, northern-ish Wisconsin, and there's not a lot of agriculture around. Maybe there's a field within a mile or two, but you're not surrounded by it. And this is your very first year owning it. And you just bought it in the spring. Maybe it's June or July. Maybe we'll say the summer when you purchase it. So you get access to it in June or July. Your very first month or two of preseason, without knowing anything else, assuming some basics, what's the very first project or two you would tackle to try to get this property ready to hunt, other than getting stands up and stuff? If you could improve habitat in some kind of quick way with this basic understanding of the area, what do you think hypothetically you would tackle first?
Well, I love that question because, if that was in a northern Ohio area where there's no cover, then, cover's at a premium and critical to address cover needs. And you still can't build a herd with just cover, but in an area like that, where there's not a lot of cover, northern Ohio, southern Michigan, northern Indiana, Illinois, southern Wisconsin, then you can get away with utilizing that cover and having a decent hunt. When you get in more mixed ag area, food plots and food becomes a lot more critical. And then when you get into a northern area, food is always the most critical. And so what I like about an area like that, when you don't have ag and you don't have quality food, then a quality food plot program, it is in my area where I'm at in southwest Wisconsin and southeast Minnesota, is critical, and it sets the foundation of movement. But up there, it's even more so. And so my first step on a 40 like that is I would not have purchased it if I couldn't get food plots in, whether I was planning to hire a dozer and have them come in, but
I would have bought a 40 that was somewhat diverse, probably had some open field cover or pasture, something I could easily convert to food pretty quickly. And so that would be the first step. And it's kind of like you can't have food without access. So your food determines where you access, your access and how you can hunt the land determines where the food goes. So it's hard to have one without the other. But then that sets the entire foundation of movement. That sets up where bedding areas should go, travel corridors, tree stands. And so just like I did in my new property in Minnesota last year, the first steps were food, access. Once that's determined, then stand locations. And then what I do is I put a mock scrape by every stand location. And if I have the ability, I'll put a trail camera at every stand location too. So that's kind of the sequence just about anywhere, but up north where food is scarce, you can really draw deer in, especially mature bucks that have a tendency to travel a lot further to find quality food and find quality food that's not hunter pressured. Then getting food in is something that can make or break your season for you just that first year. So it's not something that takes years. Once you get that food in, that's a calling card that'll extend for a couple miles in any direction or more in an area like that.
So knowing not much else, I'm giving you a pretty vague situation here. Can you give me any more detail on ideally how large of a plot you'd want in that situation? Ideally what you think you would plant in that situation? Anything like that?
Yeah, and this depends on someone's resources too. For me, my Southwest Wisconsin parcel that I hunt a lot, that's 30 acres of cover, 50-acre property. And on that, we get away with, and there's about 15 acres of fields. There's horse pastures, house buildings. But there, I get away with about 2.25 acres of food plot. And I can offer something fairly diverse with a green base. And what I mean by that is, we'll have brassica planted on one side. We'll have oats, beans, peas, late planted rye on the other side, all plantings August or later. But we have the complement of ag land. So what that means is that the food that I plant in a situation like that lasts a lot longer because deer are not feeding on that property typically under the cover of darkness. They're out in the ag fields that surround the area. When you go up north and you don't have the complement of those ag fields and you don't have that quality food, you find that deer feed 5 times in a 24-hour period as rhythmic pattern feeders. And you're familiar with rhythmic pattern feeders with your kids.
Yeah.
Young kids. And when they're babies, they're feeding every 2 hours, 3 hours, and then that expands over time. But with deer, they're right at that 5 hours or every 4 hours, 5 hours, and they feed 5 times a day. So when they're doing that in an up north setting, they hit your food plots a much higher percentage of time out of those 5 times than they would in an ag area. In an ag area where you have the complement of ag at night and you're trying to make your property more of a daylight parcel, they're eating browse in their bedding areas, then they hit your food plot in the afternoon for the third feeding of the day. And then at night, a lot of times they're out in the surrounding ag fields. So, but when you go up north, so you might get 1.5 times that they're really appreciably eating your food plot. We're up north, I've seen it in some cases, they're hitting your food plots 5 times in a 24-hour period. And so the 2.25 acres I get away with in Southwest Wisconsin, I like to expand that in a northern setting to 4 or 5 acres on that 40. So there's no set percentage of food plot that you should have on any parcel. It's really based on the region. And what's interesting, you could probably have half as many deer or a third as many deer in a situation like that, and you're still going to need double the food. And with that, the more diversity, meaning if you have brassica, late planted peas, late planted beans, oats, rye, quite a few of those are not very browse resistant. For example, brassica. I've seen it rot in the fields in the spring in a very large ag area without a lot of cover and just a good complement of ag fields and forages and southern location. But then I've seen them not make it to hunting season in northern Michigan with poor soils and not a lot of deer. So it really depends on how many deer are there, but that's kind of a guesstimate. With that many acres, I would try to get something diverse in there just so I could offer something for the entire season. And so that's
that goes back to, you really can, if you have 1 acre of plots that you're putting in 2 acres, then you can really go to something more like layering rye. I started doing that in a northern setting just because it was more browse tolerant. It's not a glamour crop, but again, if you have more diversity, it's going to be eaten a lot faster, especially with some of those non-browse resistant varieties. So I really like, if there is a potential of high browse pressure, then I'm going to do something like layering rye. And what I mean by that is you're broadcasting 100 pounds per acre about a month before the first frost date. Let's say in the UP of Michigan, we'll just use that. The first frost date would usually be mid-September. And so mid-August, I'm broadcasting 100 pounds, and then 100 pounds more about 3 weeks later, and then 100 pounds after that towards the middle, latter portion of September. You're trying to fill space horizontally with something that will continue to stay green even under the snow and freeze all the way into the end of the season. So that's what I'd look at is, if I had to go with something smaller, I would look at something more browse resistant, like layering rye, maybe even starting out with a high amount of peas and light oats per acre, 100 pounds of peas, 50 pounds of oats, and then I top dress that with 200 pounds of rye maybe 5 weeks later, or just go with the straight rye. And if I can get that acreage up on that Wisconsin piece, then I'd look at something a little bit more diverse.
Okay. So what about a reverse scenario? Let's take you out of northern Wisconsin and let's take you to southern Michigan. And instead of a lot of timber, now you're in a lot of ag. It's mostly big, huge, wide open ag fields. But again, you've got a 40-acre square, and you're trying to figure out how to make the most of this in the month or so, month and a half or so you have, because you closed on June, late June maybe. It's July, August. You've got a little bit of time pre-season to make these few changes. What would you do in that scenario? Like the first project you would tackle in that scenario?
I'm still starting with food, because that's going to actually give an attraction for the parcel. With really, without a good food plot program on private land, I actually wouldn't buy the land. I'd just go on public land. Because on public land, I can actually find a food source of the moment. I can get into a remote area and enjoy hunting that movement that food source dictates. On private land, you have to offer that food and be good at it, or you're not going to have that movement. So I would look at a smaller amount of food, and then I would really try to gauge just that little bit of time, how many deer are in the area, how many deer are in the field. And if I'm looking at an average amount of deer, then I am going to plant a brassica base in a situation like that where I might worry about that brassica not being eaten. And again, the whole reason I like brassica is it's nutritious for deer. It offers a lot of moisture. It's easy for them to digest, but it can create a lot of volume quickly. And so something that you can really target towards late October, November, December. So I'd put that on one half of the plot, or plots. We're looking at more like a 2-acre to 3-acre scenario for food. And, if I had more, I'd step that up to corn the following year if I could. But just in that short period of time, I'd look at, late planted mixture of beans and peas, especially their candy crops. So it established a pattern of use for those plots right off the bat. That's something I'd plant around August 1st in southern Michigan. Then on the other half, I'd plant brassica. Now, I'd want those two side by side, not mixed together. And the reason for that is you don't want to mix them because oats, rye, wheat can compete with brassicas. So you're just limiting the amount of volume you can have in your plots. You're taking from the brassica, you're taking from the rye and wheat. It actually can be shaded out by brassica. So they're just fighting each other. So you separate that out, them apart, because you're trying to maximize the amount of volume that you can have in that given space that you're working with, making yourself as efficient as possible. Starting with that, I'd look at planting that combination, but I'd start with weed control right off the bat. And so I'm looking at how can I eliminate weeds, because weedy food plots during the summer might be, more of an attraction on a scale of attraction for deer overall because they like diversity. But when all those weeds die in August and September,
they just take from your food plots, and they can turn a 2-acre food plot into a 1/4 acre of food due to weed pressure and competition. And so really addressing weed concerns. And some people, if you don't believe in chemicals, you can try disking or tilling the ground several times in a row to do that. I prefer the chemical route just because then I don't have to use or buy heavy equipment and a big tractor. And so a lot easier to spray. And I use a lot of rotations, going forward to try to limit my use of chemicals, build the soil at the same time. But I really would look at weeds, getting those food plots established and establishing that pattern of use right off the bat. That would early August, extending to September. You really want those food plots to be doing very well by the middle of September, end of September, so those deer in the area are getting used to it. And then that food establishes, especially if there's food and it's adjacent to good bedding opportunity, then you're going to hold those against that food source. And then if you have enough room left over, you'll have bucks behind those does and into more remote locations on your property. So then you can hunt. Then you have morning stands back by buck bedding areas for the rut, pre-rut and rut, maybe even opening day of gun season on November 15th in Michigan, or you're looking at evening hunting on the way to food or closer to food. And but really starting with food establishes that entire pattern of use.
So,
and hunting, you're hunting stand assemblage.
Now here's the worst case scenario, though. Food is so important to this program that you're outlining, but what about this situation, which is something that I've called you and talked to you about in past years, and it's something that so many of us dread. But what if we go into the late summer with the game plan like you just described? We plant our fall food plots, let's say August 26th, and there's great rain in the forecast, and we get our brassicas in the ground, and we get some cereal grains in the ground, whatever it might be, and it looks good. We get it in the ground, but then that rain that was forecasted for tonight ends up just being a little drizzle, and then tomorrow it's gone. There's nothing. And the next day there's nothing. And the next week there's nothing. And 2 weeks, 3 weeks goes by, and no rain appears. What do you do in that situation when you plan it on August 25th, you get a little bit of rain in the front, and then it's a drought for 3 weeks, and now you're into September, opening day is October 1st, and it's, September 15th or something, and you've got nothing coming out of the ground. What do you do then?
The really cool thing about that is you just don't have to worry about it. Try to get that out of your mind. Like, so many people just stress out about that and lose sleep. And that was my Wisconsin last year. It was the first time I had a brassica failure due to drought anywhere, but in Wisconsin since 2002, 2020 was the first time. So it's not very common this happens, especially if you can pay attention to when you actually put the brassica in the ground. For example, you're saying August 24th. Well, if there's really good rains, I target around August 1st. But if there's really good rains the end of July, I'll stick it in before that rain if I can. If there's no rain in the forecast, I'll wait till the 15th of August. So there's a little bit of gray area there for when you plant and paying attention to the rain. But once that fails, and most of the time I'd say on most properties it fails more because the deer eat it down to the dirt. And there's a lot of complexities that go into that too. But really you're looking at, if you figure out it failed in early September in southern Michigan, mid-September in southern Ohio, southern Indiana, Illinois, northern Kentucky, then you're putting about 200 pounds of winter rye right over the top of your failed food plot. And if there's still 40%, 30% soil exposure towards the end of September, early October, you can add another 100 to 200 pounds of winter rye right over the top of that. And so it sounds like a lot of seed, but at that point, you're trying to fill space horizontally, not vertically. And so you're just offering a fresh, young carpet of rye. Deer love it.
When you say that,
especially when...
Sorry to interrupt, Jeff, but when you say covering things horizontally versus vertically, some people might not understand what you mean. What do you mean by horizontal versus vertical coverage?
What do I mean by that is, like, a typical rye planting would be about 100 to 110 pounds per acre, same with wheat, maybe even oats. And so you'd plant that early, and that's going to offer a lot of height, but those stems are spaced out every 2, 3, 4 inches. So you're really not filling space between stems, and so there's a lot of open bare soil. So when you plant late, and you plan for that, and it's good to plant late. It's better because then you can plant more seed. You're not looking for seed head production in the future. You're not harvesting this the following year. So you're looking at multiple stems. So your stems per square inch is much higher, 3 or 4 times higher than a traditional planting. And in that way, you're filling space horizontally, meaning you're just stem after stem after stem. So when you stand over the field, it looks like a sod, a lawn, instead of a field where there's a stem every 3 or 4 inches. So you see less of the soil. And in that way, it's a fresh, young crop. Deer love rye, wheat, even oats when it's young. And so you're taking that low, lush carpet into the hunting season that's very attractive, and it gives the deer a mouthful every time they take a bite. So it's not just and you can't do that early. For example, that's why I say if you're layering rye, and we're talking winter rye, fall rye, rye grain, not rye grass, but that's why if you're doing that and you're layering it, you're starting about a month before the first frost date in your area with just 100 pounds. You don't want to put 300 pounds down in that first hit, because you're going to fill that space with a lot of growth that is not fresh and not tender. And you're really not, it's almost like they are competing for nutrients at that point. And so you're going to limit the amount of attractive forage that you have, where if you layer that 100 pounds, that layer down at the bottom is always fresh and tender. That middle layer is okay. And then that upper layer. So you're really trying to fill that space that you have as much as possible. And that's where the rye, whether you had a plot failure because deer overbrowsed it, or because that it actually failed due to drought, you can still save the season. And I just look at it like, yeah, it's a little bit of extra money for the seed and more time for planting, but it's so easy. You just broadcast it. I use a Earthway handheld spreader, just a bag spreader. And so it's easy to put out. You just have to pay attention, see where your plots are at early September to mid-September. But I try to just not worry about it. That's what I had to do last year in Wisconsin. It was crazy, just 50 minutes apart from Minnesota. We had great rains in Minnesota, and it was a real drought factor in August into early September in Wisconsin. So I threw about 300 to 400 pounds of rye over it in 2 different plantings total, and just had a really thick covering of rye and enjoyed the season. Still had deer hitting it, and not the volume or diversity I'd like, but at that point, you just can't worry about it. And the cool thing is, we're not like farmers where we're harvesting this and we have to rely on it for a living and to feed our family. We're just feeding deer and just get something green on there. And, you can try with different, and that's even like if you're up in like that first scenario in northern Wisconsin, where we try to have a diverse planting in 3 or 4 acres, but if the deer eat it to the ground or we have drought, just throw rye on it and enjoy the season.
So in that scenario, when you're broadcasting, you're top seeding that rye, that winter rye, do you have to time that with a special set of weather circumstances, like you need to do it just before rain, or do you just put it down when you can and it'll germinate next time there's rain and you don't need to worry too much? Like, what's your thought process in this kind of emergency scenario?
I'm just getting the rye on the ground when I can. The great thing about rye is it's a very resistant seed to drought conditions, where even cold, they've had it germinate down. I think Michigan State University did a study where it germinated down to 37-degree soil temperature. So it'll grow in very cold circumstances. I've actually had it germinate in early October in the UP of Michigan, and that was after 3 or 4 inches of snow on opening day of October. I spread that rye at the end of September. It melted over a week period. It got back up in the 60s and 70s, and that melting snow actually germinated the rye. It's a very hardy seed. Unlike clover or brassica, those tiny little seeds dry out quickly if they half germinate, and then you don't get any rain, they'll just die immediately. Well, rye is very, very hardy. So I would look at more just getting it on the ground at that point. And the great thing about August into September and October is rain and moisture only increases as you go into November. So it's on the increase at that time, not the decrease. August can be spotty with thunder showers, but once you get into September, October, rains are definitely coming.
Okay. All right. So let's just move this scenario forward a little bit further. And let's say you managed to get your first year of food plots and improvements in, and they actually performed wonderfully. You had the kind of deer sightings and deer use you were hoping for. It worked out great. But you noticed one thing. And the one negative thing you noticed was that your neighbors on all three sides of this square, let's say you've got road frontage on one side and then neighbors on the other three sides of your 40-acre square, all your neighbors found out that you were making a bunch of improvements and that deer really like to hang out in your property. And so all of them started posting up right on the property line. And you were noticing deer spooking, you were seeing neighbors walking the property line, you saw ladder stands right on the edge, etc., etc. You fast forward to year 2, knowing what the neighbors were doing in that situation. How would you change things? Or what would you modify? Or what might you do to account for neighbors that were trying to crowd your little piece of heaven that you created?
Well, the good thing is that bucks in general, and especially if you look at does, they might move 50 to 100 yards during the daylight on an average day during the entire season, especially if they have the food and the cover that they want, and that's what you're trying to do. A buck in that situation where there's not a lot of cover, he might only move 100 to 300 yards during daylight. And I'm not talking about his 3-mile home range. It's mostly at night. It's during the daylight. And if he has that food and he has those conditions on your land, what I find is when those neighbors start to pack in around you, then those deer tighten their movements or daily movements. And so I'm not saying that you can hold a dozen mature bucks on your land, but you can really have them focus on your land during the daylight, especially that afternoon feeding. And when that happens, you take your neighbors out of the scenario quite a bit. And what I do too in a situation like that is, where if I have a cabin in the middle of the property or something like that. But in general, I'm accessing around my borders a lot. And so that helps me preserve a high percentage of the 40 acres that I own, make payments on, pay taxes on. That allows me to develop that core area in the center. I really like offering, in a case like that, let's say you had food in the middle of the 40, it's not a very valuable 40-acre parcel because you only have about 250 yards of depth before you hit your neighbor's borders. You're expecting to hold does, fawns, young bucks, old bucks in 250 yards of depth. And it's just, 150 yards of depth, and it's just not possible. And so I'm looking at, and even a 20-acre parcel that has food all towards the front, that'll have more depth, 300 yards of depth. And what I mean by that is you're putting 5 acres of food. Say a rectangle 20-acre parcel is 220 yards by 440 yards. Let's say it's a rectangle running north and south. If you put all that food on the south side, close to the road, and you can get around it without spooking deer, now you have over 300 yards of depth to the back of your parcel. You have a lot of room to hold deer. And so if you're accessing around your border in that case, and your food to one side, then it allows you to extend a lot of depth to your property. And that's where it becomes critical. You're not bisecting your property and walking through the middle of it and spooking deer from either side, depending on which way the wind's blowing. You're trying to conserve as many core acres as possible that relate to that food. Let's say 25 acres, 28 acres out of 40. You have that exterior access road. If your neighbors want to come, they're not coming through your land to get there, which means they're coming through their land. And what I find is if they have a buck that's bedding on their land and wants to hit your food every day, that buck just tightens his window of daylight movement onto your land. And so he takes that neighboring hunting pressure out of the equation. In a case like that, you're going to be limited as far as how older bucks you can produce. That's all relative, older buck. It might be if there's high hunting pressure, you might be looking to shoot a 2 or 3 year old buck every year. And that'd be great. If there's lower hunting pressure and you don't have a scenario where they're on all sides, maybe you can actually find a 3 to 4 year old buck every single year, even in southern Michigan. But you're still doing what you can to reach that buck age structure potential on your land based on the constraints you have to work with. So accessing around your borders, making sure the food is located to one side primarily so you could extend the depth into the parcel. And then working on the deer habitat within the parcel, that's stage 2. That's usually the second year. where you're working on cuttings and habitat so that you're layering those formations of quality bedding cover so that you're separating deer more and you're giving them the illusion that this parcel is a lot bigger than it actually is. For example, the opposite of that would be just 40 acres of open mature hardwood. You can see all the way through it with just an inch of snow on the ground in November, where if you have those cuttings and you have those different habitat features, then you can actually create a situation where deer feel comfortable only bedding 100 yards away from a food source because there's so many layers of cover to get to that point that they don't see each other. They might smell each other. They might hear each other, but they can feel like they have their own space. So there's a lot of things you can do to still improve your property and just kind of take your neighbors out of the equation.
Yeah. One of the main things you talked about right there was access. And I wonder about how you would handle a challenging access kind of monkey wrench thrown into the gears here. What if you had a property like this that you improved, and maybe even before you improved it, it had a lot of great things going for it. It had great cover. It had some great food sources already and places where you could add more. So you were able to really fine-tune it the way you wanted to and provide everything these deer would want to hang out on your property a lot, except one downside. And the downside of this is that this property only offers access from the west. And so with the predominant winds that you get in southern Michigan or wherever this is, you're getting a lot of those west, northwest, southwest winds throughout most of the hunting season. And that means that most of the time you're trying to get in there, your wind is blowing right in there where you want to go. So in that situation, would you avoid, and actually let me yeah, that's right. I think I'm describing this correctly. Would you avoid purchasing a property like that at all that would blow into, no, I'm getting this wrong. I think it's the opposite. What I'm trying to describe is that did I get it right?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're coming in from the west, your predominant winds are west, and in most cases like that, you can still go up to your north line or your south line, to come in.
Yep.
Even if you can't start at that point, you have to angle over, and so then I'm making those habitat improvements accordingly. And a lot of times, like if the road is on the west side, then I'm trying to position that food source or those food sources as close to the west border as possible, but not so close that I can't move in and park without spooking deer or access a cabin or a trailer. And then also I want to be able to get around that food on the north and south side. So that way, if it's hardly ever straight west, the wind. And so if has a southerly component, I'm walking in on the north side. And if it has a northerly component, I'm walking in on the south side. And in that case, I'd rather have the food close to the road because that food offers a stopping point. I'm not running a line of food that extends to the road so they get hit on the road, but I'm putting a big patch of food there so that I can get around it, and then the deer have to move from the east side of the property all the way across my own property to get to that food source. And then I can hunt those lines of movement where if I can get around that food in the morning, I can go all the way to the back on the east side, wait for deer to come back to me in the form of bucks in those furthest bedding areas. Or I can hunt the sides or even at the food source in the afternoon, evening as deer are moving to that food, and more predictable afternoon movement to that food because I haven't hunter pressured it and they're getting there about an hour before dark, half hour, or at dark in the case of the bucks.
Okay.
So in that case, as long as I could cut up to the north and get around or cut down to the south, where I see problems or where people run into problems, and then it boils down to how good the area is, and what type of hunting pressure there is generally in the area. But there might be a big swamp on the south side that cuts off the lower 10 acres, and so you can't move through there on the south side. And so really it pinches all your movements up to the north. And so I run into scenarios like that sometimes where then you just have to figure out where you can put food, how it relates to your land and your neighbor's land, and how you can actually get around your property without spooking deer in your improvements. And sometimes people's improvements are getting in the way, and it's hard. I come in looking at it black and white. People have problems. So I look at it as if there's a food source that's allowing deer to pattern you more than them, just get rid of the food source or shrink it, cut it in half, screen it better, something.
There's some people that I've talked to who look at a scenario like that and they say that they will embrace the impact they make. And they'll say, okay, I know that deer will know I'm here, so I'm always going to walk the same access path or the same 75%. I take the same route every single time. So deer just get used to the fact that there's always human activity on this route, and they eventually accept it. And then you stick to that, and they almost pattern that behavior. That's okay. But then you branch off of that and drop into other places where they're not expecting you. And you avoid, rather than a bunch of different access routes all over the place that are all unexpected and that always spook deer right away. And I don't know, is that general idea, does that make sense to you at all? Or does that seem counterintuitive? What are your thoughts on that?
Extremely counterintuitive if you actually want to be the neighborhood influencer and shoot mature bucks on a consistent basis. I'm not talking about one every 3 or 4 years. I'm talking about shooting 80% of the target bucks in the area over a 10-year period. And so you have to give them that space where they have the illusion, because now I'm all for that if it's exterior access roads, but not through the middle of the property, because they never get used to it. A mature buck never gets used to it. If you're hunting 2 or 3-year-old bucks in lower Michigan, then a portion of those 2-year-olds might get used to it. The 3-year-olds won't. But if you step up to an area that has 4 or 5-year-old bucks, they won't put up with that in any way. So it really depends on what you want to get out of your hunting land. And deer will never get used to you coming in or out unless you're in a state like Kansas or Iowa, what I refer to as fantasy land states. And in those areas like Kansas, they have 25,000 bow hunters. I think Iowa has 65,000 bow hunters. Michigan had over 400,000 bow hunters at one time. So the amount of pressure you can apply in some of these other states is a lot different than you can apply in 95% of all whitetail areas. And so what you do down there can't be translated into, say, a higher pressure state. At the same time, even in those areas, you probably have 6 or 7-year-old bucks. And so, you might be content with shooting 4 or 5-year-old monster bucks, but if you really want to step your game up to those oldest bucks in the neighborhood, even in an area like Kansas or Iowa, you're going to have to really play to a different tune, where deer just settle on the fact that deer are never going to get used to, other than does, fawns, and maybe some young bucks.
Yeah.
They'll get used to it. Kind of like you drive a 4-wheeler by and deer stand up and watch you. And you can even extend that. I know some of the guides and outfitters in the Buffalo County area in Wisconsin, well, they kill a lot of their bucks by driving hunters to stands, but they also only experience about a 20% success rate overall with their clients. I expect to have an 80-90% success rate every single year. So my expectations are a lot higher for myself than putting up with just, knowing there's good bucks in the area. You bump one, another one comes in, and you get one every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. I would love to be in this situation you described there, where there's 6 and 7-year-old bucks and you have to settle for a 4 or 5-year-old every year. That would be great. I'd like to find that one.
It's funny. I go to clients in some of those areas, because I have clients. I've had one in Gaylord, Michigan, where they hadn't seen an antlered buck in 7 years.
Wow.
During the daylight. So they literally had not seen a buck as their hunting group for 7 years. So that's the bottom of the barrel. And then I'll have clients in some of those fantasy land states, and they're looking at, they've been doing great on the 4 and 5-year-olds and seeing them 150, 60, even a 70-inch buck, 170-inch buck, but they're those 180, 190, 200-inch bucks. And people say, like, a 200-inch buck is rare, but I know a lot of different states and areas where hunters and landowners are seeing 200-inch plus deer every single year. And so it seems like a pipe dream, but it really isn't. They're a lot more common. It's just in those areas, they just have to get the age and a high percentage or fall into that category, a lot higher than you'd think. But even then, a lot of those clients are hiring me because they want to step up their game. They have those. It's no different than if you're happy shooting 2 or 3-year-olds in Michigan, and then you notice that some of your neighbors are starting to pick off some 4-year-olds, and you think, man, I just want to do things different, so I can start tapping into those a little bit.
Yeah. So let's move into a hunting season situation here. Let's say you've got your property. Let's say it's hypothetically it's a lease. It's a lease property. It's something you've been able to kind of spend a little bit of time on. It's in pretty good shape. And throughout the summer, late summer into September, you've been getting daylight trail camera pictures of a good mature buck that you would love to get a crack at. And he's moving in daylight here and there, early September. You get a little bit of him in mid-September. You get a little bit of him in late September, daylight. But you get to opening day. And I guess we'll use one of those states that have an October 1st opener, like Michigan or wherever. And you get to just before opening day. And you've been very excited because he's been moving in daylight leading up to the opening day. And then the day before the opener, a heat wave appears. And now September 30th, it's 80 degrees. And then the forecast says that October 1st is going to be 77 degrees. And October 2nd is going to be 76 degrees. And you see that the first couple of days of the season are not looking so good for what we would hope as far as weather conditions for big buck movement. At the same time, though, you also know that, man, I know all my neighbors are going to start hunting on October 1st, and they're going to be out there hitting it. So you've got two thoughts in your mind. One side of you says, wow, I should wait until the hot weather dissipates and save my hunts for when the conditions are a little bit better. The other side of you says, man, every day I wait, there's more and more pressure around me, and this buck that was moving in daylight in September is going to get spooked and turn nocturnal or hang out just by his bedroom. What would you do in that situation, Jeff? Would you hunt opening night even though it's going to be warm because you want to take advantage of that first night of the season? Or would you wait until the first front moves through or weather improves a little bit?
That's a really good question. I love that question a lot. And it really depends on the hunting pressure around me and how safely I feel I can get in and out of a stand. So say, for example, likely because of the heat, he's not going to be moving early. But at the same time, if I can get into a position where I'm taking advantage of food source movements or water hole or something, even back in the woods, if I feel I can go hit that stand and not leave a really good presence on the land or a footprint, then I would definitely go in and try to hunt that deer. It all boils down to where I think that deer is coming from. And I look at it too, again, I'm looking at like, I have in Wisconsin, for example, I have a lot of neighboring hunting pressure. And those guys those hunters don't really have much of an impact on the daylight movement that I have on my own parcel, even though it's only 30 acres, because my food plots are daylight plots. My bedding areas are daylight plots. The mock scrapes, the travel corridors, everything that the deer are moving on in that parcel, they can differentiate even more when pressure comes that my property is even more daylight. Those big bucks, those mature bucks still have to move during daylight. They're still feeding 5 times in a 24-hour period. They're on their feet those 5 times. And so I'm looking at like there's not really that much impact to that hunting pressure around, especially if he's daylight focusing on my land, and I've done my job to do that. And so really then it boils down to if I feel I need that front to get him to move early enough for me to go into that stand and actually hunt him, then I'll wait for that cold front. If not, then I'm going in there and sitting as soon as possible with the thought that I'm not going to have a great amount of impact on future hunts by hunting a stand that might be kind of iffy on percentages of chance based on the hot weather and poor weather.
Yeah. All right, so let's take it one step further then. Let's say that you decide that you need to wait for the front because of those conditions and because of the way your property sets up. And the front is going to hit on October 7th, the evening of October 7th. Maybe just after dark, the peak of that's going to push through. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, cold front's coming through. It's October 7th, and this is going to be great. Problem is, your wife says, things are really crazy right now at home, and I do not want you spending a bunch of time in the woods. You've got one hunt over the next week. You've got one sit. Otherwise, you need to be at home helping out with stuff. So you could hunt that evening that the front hits. You could hunt the morning after. You could hunt the evening after. You could hunt the next day. You've got one sit, morning or evening. What sit would you pick for your best chances, given the light amount of information I'm giving you? How would you approach that?
So that time of year, I'm typically not hunting morning stands unless it's a long movement coming back from ag fields with no hunting pressure, and I feel just by little scouting and intel that those bucks are hitting their bedding areas late just because they're taking a long time to go through fairly safe habitat and get back to their beds that they want to bed in, back in the woods somewhere, back in the cover. And so I'm not hunting a lot of morning situations, and I don't really have a lot of good morning early season stands on either my property in Minnesota or Wisconsin until it gets to about October 20th in the pre-rut, maybe October 18th. And so right away, I'm starting to migrate towards evening and looking at an evening hunt. And if I had a couple of evenings to choose from, maybe the front's going through on one, I'm always looking for the first clearing conditions after the front goes through, meaning that I don't really care what the barometric pressure is, because there could be another front coming through 4 days later and the pressure's down, or it could be that it just cleared out completely and the pressure's high. But if we just had a temperature drop of at least 7 to 10 degrees or greater, and it seems like the greater the front, the more volatility there is in the weather, meaning higher wind speeds, maybe thunderstorms, lightning, snowstorms, sleet, hail, rain, but there's more of an extremity of weather factors. So I'm looking for that to all blow through. I don't care if the winds go from 30 to 15 miles an hour or 15 down to 5. I'm just looking for that time when everything's broken, and everything's broken through, meaning in the weather, it's cleared up, and then that's that time that I'm hitting that stand. So I'm really watching those winds at that point. So if that first evening opportunity, let's say the weather went through or is going through right then, and it's still at, the peak winds are at 25 to 35 mile an hour. And then the next evening, they're going to be down to 7 to 12, and it's cooling that next evening. There's no chance of rain, thunderstorms. Then I'm definitely taking that evening when the conditions have somewhat cleared. Like I said, it doesn't mean that there's calm winds. I'd actually prefer a little bit of wind, because then with some assemblage of wind, whether it's 5 miles, 8 miles an hour, it's more dependable. And I think deer move when it's more dependable too. There's less variance. So anyways, I'm just looking for those conditions to clear, the wind to subside a little bit, that temperature's definitely bottomed out, and that's where I kill a lot of my deer, a majority of my bucks. Whether it was the morning after that happened in the rut, I really focus on mornings then, or the evening after that weather went through in the early season, October lull, late season, for feeding source or food source opportunities, hunting opportunities.
Okay. You kind of answered my next question, but I'd love for you to go into a little bit more detail, which is same question, but change the date from October 7th to November 7th. You only can pick one sit. Is it the morning after? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely the morning after. So there's even, people say bucks move all day, middle of the day. And, you see that, but deer have to rest too. And typically they're resting in the heat of the day. I think a lot of times where you have high hunting pressure, you'll see a lot of deer move in the middle of the day just because someone bumped them from a half mile away when they get out of their stand. And so you may want to sit a little bit longer. But we're seeing a big drop off in deer activity on unpressured properties during the peak rut like that, between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Let's say it's getting dark at 5:30. So you have a little bit of window of movement in the evening. But boy, I've seen some outstanding. I've had some great sits where I've seen 10, 12 bucks up till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was just all morning long. And so I'm really focused. And I think there's, in those times, if you're back by those bedding areas, you're not sitting on a food source somewhere or a food plot. You're actually near their bedding areas, off to the side, downwind, between bedding areas on a funnel. But really, you get several hours of outstanding hunting from daybreak to 12, 1, 1:30, something like that. We had a time where we hunted 4 days during the rut. We sat dark to dark. This would have been going back to maybe 2003. And we saw, between the two of us, approximately 24, 26 different bucks during that time. And we did not see one buck between 11:30 and 1. It was just because it was teens, 20 during the morning, and it'd warm up to 30, 35 during the day. The bucks were just taking a rest, and then we'd see a little bit of flurry of activity the last hour or two of daylight.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to maximize your time, even just a half sit, definitely focus on those mornings.
Yep.
In fact, I'd choose a morning hunt like that if I had to just pick one day for the entire 4-month season besides opening day of gun season, because I love the tradition of that, then I'd pick one of those days in early November, a morning sit.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co, and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Let's rewind a little bit and let's go back into mid-ish October. Let's say we're in the window that a lot of people refer to as the October lull. Let's say October 15th to the 25th, give or take. And you head out there for an evening hunt on one of your spots, and you notice that there is a doe getting chased by a buck. And it's not a 1.5 year old just messing around. It's actually like a 3-year-old buck, maybe even a 4-year-old buck that's seemingly chasing a doe around. Some people would say, oh man, the rut's early, get after it. Some people would say, oh, it's an anomaly, don't worry about it. Would you observe that on your evening hunt in that window and change anything at all for the next day or the next week? Or would you continue as normal and assume that was just an anomaly that you're not worried about?
Now, what was the date again, Mark?
This scenario is somewhere between October 15th and 25th.
Okay. And I'm seeing that rutting activity in the evening.
Yep, you're seeing this early rutting activity. There's a decently mature buck, a 3 or 4 year old maybe, and he's after a doe pretty hard. Would that change your approach for the next day or two, or would you just keep on with your mid-October plan as usual? What would you do in that situation?
Well, it's tough because if it is like I'm looking at, we see a lot of rutting activity. One of the best signs of early season or pre-rut rutting activity is deer when they're sitting dry all day, meaning in a bedding area, they're eating acorns, they're eating buds, shoots. They're working up quite a bit of thirst. We typically see them only hitting water holes in the evening, but right around the 19th, 20th, 21st of October, when it starts to get cold, those bucks start becoming active in the mornings, and all of a sudden they're hitting water holes at 10 o'clock, noon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Just because they're thirsty, they're starting to move around a little bit more. So really depends on that time. I'm starting to hit my morning stands typically around the 20th of October at some point. So let's say this was the 15th. In the evening, I see this mature buck. It's a little bit earlier than I typically would go in. Then I'm going to figure out, if I think that buck is in a bedding area or around a bedding area that I can actually hunt on that land, and he's one of my target bucks, I'm definitely going to try to get in there the next morning if I can, and try to go after that buck in his bedding area or around a bedding area where I think he might be moving.
What would that look like? Like what can you paint for me a picture what that type of morning setup would look like in a scenario that you would actually say, okay, I'm going in there and this is the type of spot I would sit?
Yes. So first things, when you're accessing, then I'm not going through a food source. I'm typically going well around food plots, ag fields, and I'm going in almost like a back door to that bedding area or off the side of it. So I'm getting on the downwind side. I'm not just walking into the middle of the bedding area knowing that I have to spook deer when I get out later in the day. I'm hunting to one side where I feel my wind. I can blow my scent and not get in too much trouble. And so I'm looking at a lot of times those bedding areas, even on that 30-acre parcel where we had food plots, I'm hunting high up above in the ridge tops. Most of those bedding areas I'm sitting by, or the movements between them, are approximately 300 to 400 yards away from the food plots down below in the valley. We get a lot of surfaced areas, so it might be literally 400 yards away, 350 yards away. So they're quite a ways away from food. I'm going around those food sources to get in. And then depending on where I'm blowing my scent, if I'm blowing my scent into a swamp or a pond or off a cliff where there's no deer, then I feel like I can get in there a half hour, 45 minutes before light, and there's no problem. But if I need those thermals and I'm hunting in a hilly situation where, or maybe I'm blowing my scent into a horse pasture or an open field where a buck would not be during the daylight, but he might be right before daylight, then I'm getting into that stand location, what I call just in time, where there's a short window of period where I'm using the gray light to get into the stand. I'm getting on that downwind side of the bedding area. I'm blowing my scent into an iffy area before daylight, but once it hits daylight, I'm relatively safe. And so I'm getting into that stand at that time, just in time, where you're using the gray light, you're getting in. And so the access time will be determined by the location and how safe my scent is downwind of me before it even gets daylight.
Well, as you're discussing that, it sent me in a kind of random direction. So bear with me on this, Jeff. Right. Bear with me on my random digressions here. But as I'm thinking about this, it sent me down this rabbit hole in my mind where I started thinking about your hunting season last year and how well things seem to pan out. You've got these plans that you put in place, and you've got these contingencies, and you've got an answer to every question seemingly in the real world when you're out there hunting yourself. And last year, from the outside looking in, it looked like everything went perfect. You killed all sorts of bucks. Your kids killed bucks. Your wife killed bucks. It seemed like you guys put 72 tags on big mature bucks across your properties. Yeah, but what it makes me wonder is, what's the situation that confounds you? Like, what's the question that you haven't had an answer to? What's the situation you found yourself in that you were cussing to yourself and like, damn it, I don't know what to do? Like, when's the last time you found yourself in those shoes that you were confused or perplexed or frustrated by a buck and you got beat and you sat there in your bed at night thinking to yourself, dang, what in the world did I do wrong? Or why can't I figure this out? Can you think of a situation like that over the last couple of years that stands out that you could share with us where you got beat and you didn't have the right answer and you've had to think about it and stew on it and try to figure out what you should have done different? Is there something that comes to mind?
Yeah, there is. And my approach to hunting is I try to have this no-nonsense pragmatic approach. I look at it very methodically. So here's the plan. These are the 3 stands out of 18 that are good for this morning's wind. I just hunted by this one. And so I make decisions like that based on, a very systematic approach to hunting the low pressure stand, staying off the side. So I allow that system to take place and not affect my emotion as much. There's been many stands that I've shot my best buck ever out of that I never hunted again, or I didn't hunt for 2 or 3 years just because it didn't come up in the wind rotation the following year. So I look at things very systematically. One thing that really confounded me last year was we had a great season. Minnesota was awesome. Shot my target buck, I think it was October 28th. And, Diane got her first buck with a bow. We had so many good things happening. But in Wisconsin, I went over there for the first time the end of October. and I promptly wounded a buck. And, you look in the footage, and the buck dropped 6 inches before my arrow got there. Dylan put even some illustration on there to show that. But bottom line is I just didn't aim low enough, because I know when they're inside that bubble of 20, 25 yards and they hear that noise of the bow going off or any kind of disturbance, they have a tendency to just run. And when they do that, it seems like they duck the arrow. So that was the first buck. Luckily we got pictures of him in January. He's alive, made it through the season, recovered from his high wound. And so the next set out, I promptly missed a buck at 30 yards. The arrow stuck in the tree. He was one that I was really after for a couple of years, a nice 5-year-old. I think the next sit out, I had a big monster booner. I don't even know how big it was, that responded to a grunt of mine, and then he stopped. I knew I shouldn't have done it. He was at 40, 45 yards through the brush and just standing there. I grunted again. He turned around and walked away. I don't know if I spooked him to this day, but I feel like I messed up, because once you grunt and they move your way, you should put the thing away and just shut up and not worry about grunting again unless he starts walking away, on his own. And so I really messed up there. My friend Mike from Michigan, he came out, and now I can say I did have COVID during this time. We'll offer an excuse there, but there's really no excuse. But Mike was over my shoulder. He just wanted to come out and sit with me. He was going to hunt for a gun season opener. And I had a buck come in that was point blank, a really nice one, and a nice mature buck, and I missed him right with Mike by my side. And, fast forward to early January, I missed another 5-year-old that I'd passed up 2 years prior, or the year prior. He was a 4-year-old then, and he made it through the season too. So I didn't film my Wisconsin tag last year. And I just got really beat up. It'd been about 10 years since I had a season like that, and I hope it's just going to happen every 10 years. But I practiced a lot. We have a good outdoor range at the new house, and I was able to shoot long distance, short distance, all over the place. And it just I shot with Diane a lot because it was her first year using a vertical bow. She'd send me pictures of groups, but I just for whatever reason, had one of those years that it seemed like, still had my really good buck opportunities. I think every 3 or 4 sets I had a chance at another mature buck. I just really messed up my season. Had to eat my tag, and that's just the way it goes sometimes. But that was a very, very frustrating season. And the one good thing is, though, the season was open till the end of January for bow, and so I got to hunt all the way to the end of January.
Yeah.
and I wore my tag out.
And you still filled several tags, though, between Minnesota and somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I shot one in Kentucky and then 2 in Minnesota. And then I shot a really good target buck with my muzzle loader in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So I can't complain. But that bow tag is one that, since 2002 in Wisconsin, I think I haven't filled it maybe one other time. And no one's going to feel sorry for me. But the whole point is that it was a very frustrating season. And I'm really hoping I don't have another one like that. I actually am just putting a new sight on, just it's a new look. And I'll get a different bow. I just usually try to change things up. That's what I did after 2010, and it worked for the next 10 years or 9 years, whatever it was. But that was it was fun. I got to experience a lot. It's almost like, really, do you become a better hunter if you go out and sit one time and shoot a buck, or 2 times, 3 times? I got to experience the whole season. I think I learned more about the land, even on a land that I've hunted since 2014.
I have experienced the same thing you just described, and it's no fun. And you always go.
But
there's parts of it that are fun to be out there hunting more often, but the moments right after, the days right after, are not fun. How did you handle the immediate period after one of those misses or after that wound? Some people are of the mind that they're like, I'm getting right back out there, and they're back out there the very next day, the very next hunt. Some people, they need to take time away. They need to go shoot for a few days or a week. How do you mentally handle that? Where you've put in, I know you, Jeff, you've put in a tremendous amount of work and time and effort and resources into getting a shot at one of these mature bucks. And to have that opportunity right there and then it slip through your fingers, I know how much that must frustrate you and what that feels like. What goes through your mind that night, that next day? How do you rebound from that?
Boy, that's a great question, because I look at it, again, what's my next opportunity? When's my next sit? I think the second time the first time that I missed, that was on election day. And I had hunted in the morning and I missed. And I'm just stubborn and determined enough that I hadn't planned on sitting all day in that stand. But it's one that's a transition between bedding and food. It's kind of a big X movement where it's located. I thought it could offer a good sit all day. And so even though my glowing knock was sticking in the tree at 29 yards and I'd just stare at it all day and I had no food or water, I just stayed in the stand because I'm very stubborn.
That's my own personal hell right there.
That's me too. It's kind of like you deserve to look at that knock all day. So
yeah.
It's, and it was crazy. I got down, walked all the way down, ended up going to vote that night with Diane. I was sweating in the election where we at Village Hall, and I just didn't feel, I felt really tired out. And that was on a Tuesday. Well, then we went to dinner that night. I actually felt like going back with Diane. She had driven separate, and leaving my truck in Coon Valley, just going home 50 minutes away in Minnesota, because I just didn't feel like I could stay awake on the way home. And of course, I had a fever on Saturday and we got confirmed the following week we had COVID, but that was the start of it. I just thought it was because I didn't eat and drink all day. And it was kind of almost torture, but it was, I have that more like that approach. Like, man, this is not going to beat me. Even with COVID, I went hunting 3 times when I had COVID, walking up that hill 35 minutes. The one time I literally took 18 breaks. Normally I take 1 or 2 and got to my stand 40 minutes after I should have. But and then the next day I'd be in bed all day. I don't know how close I pushed it, to being really sick. But it's kind of like that stubborn determination that I'm just not going to let this beat me, whether it was COVID or missing deer or wounded deer. My thought is to get right back out there, get right back on the saddle and try to make something happen.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have helped me to take a week or 2 off and try to reassess and shoot my bow a little bit, make some changes. But it's just not my nature.
Yeah. What about another one of these kick in the nuts situations, which is not missing a deer, but you're up there, and we'll just continue with the November timeframe. Let's say you're up there in the tree, and the big old buck that you've been wanting to get a crack at all season, he's coming in, and you got your bow in hand, you're getting ready, you're about to draw back, and something happens, and he busts you. Feel free to elaborate how your answer here might differ based on the kind of bust, but let's say he busts you and he skedaddles out of there. He knows something was up and he gets out of there on November 12th, let's say. What would you do in that situation? Would you give up on that tree completely, even though this big old buck came through here today? Would you say, he spooked out of there, this spot's burned, and you're going to change up your strategy and try to catch him somewhere else? Or would you say, well, it's the rut. He busted me, but it's crazy times, and he might follow doe right back through here, and I know this is such a good spot that him or the number 2 buck might roll through still. How would you handle that scenario where you get busted out of a tree in the rut? What's the impact you think that's going to have, and how do you react?
I look at it like, in my mind, I write that stand off for that buck for the rest of the season. And I've had deer that 10 days later come into a situation like that, stop 30 yards away and start moving around the stand just because they know something bad is in that direction. And so I really look at it that I'm not going after that buck, but what's really worked, though, is to pivot and just go to a completely different stand location on the other side of the property. It's crazy how a buck that wasn't regularly using that side of the property all of a sudden shifts his patterns because of that mistake that you made. And you can walk right in and shoot him the first time in that stand. Lo and behold, your number 1 buck. And it was just because you relocated yourself, a quarter mile away. 400 yards away, 300 yards, whatever it was, and you got into his new daylight core range because you ultimately didn't want to leave that area, or he was still around. And at the same time, maybe you have a small enough property where he's gone. I'm just starting to focus on number 2 then. But really, I found shifting over, we've killed several bucks like that where he just shifted to the other side of the property, and we're able to connect with that buck that, let's say it was a wound. We've shot bucks where we've got broadheads back. The wound was still healing from 10 days earlier, a week earlier, but they were a long ways away from that other stand where we messed up on them from.
What do you think that range is that you think, like, what's the epicenter of the impact is, like, where the stand was that you got busted? How far do you think you need to get away from that to remove yourself from the impact zone where you think that this buck might be forgiving again? Is it, because, when you say the other side of the property, that's obviously going to be very different depending on how big somebody's property is. So is this 200 yards? Is this a mile on average? If you had to give me some kind of range, like, how far away do you think you have to get to be in a safe zone again?
Well, I'm going to answer it and this relates to a lot of different scenarios, whether it's how far a deer beds away from a food source, how far to find a buck's bedding area away from his afternoon food source. But in a coverless ag region, that might be 100 yards away because cover is limited. And if you're in a Fantasyland state where you have a lot of mature bucks, there's hardly any hunting pressure, then maybe that buck comes right back to that location. But in where most of us hunt, that's not the case. In the UP of Michigan, you spook a deer, it might be that he's across the swamp a mile and a half where you're going to find him moving around. He's just done from that area, and he's used to a lot of space, and he takes it. His afternoon movement from his bedding area to his food source might be 3/4 of a mile regularly on a daily basis, where that's 100 yards in a coverless northern Ohio flat ag region. So, where I'm at, it's more like, I get 300-400 yards away, maybe an elevation change, and I'm right back in that potentially movement for daylight movement where that buck might be. So I would say 200 to 400 yards in an average scenario. In big wooded wilderness area where there's not a lot of deer, that could be a mile or more. And in a coverless ag region, like some of the ones we've talked about earlier, then that might be 100, 150 yards.
So I hate to do this, but I'm going to keep us focused on misery. And
sure, no, that's fine.
And
I think people like to hear about that.
Yeah. So here's another scenario that at least I've encountered. I think a lot of people probably have, which is you get into this same time period, November. It's the rut. It's the Super Bowl, right? We've looked forward to it all year, and maybe this is just me, but if you consume enough hunting media, if you daydream enough, if you're as voyeuristically of an optimist as I am, you're just dreaming and imagining that November is going to be amazing, right? It's going to be everything you've ever imagined. There's going to be bucks running everywhere, but then inevitably you get out there and there'll be some period during the rut where it's dead. It's November 7th through the 10th, and it's supposed to be dynamite, and it is not. You're hunting great spots that are by the textbook dynamite rut hunting spots. You're downwind of an amazing doe bedding area, or you're in the pinch point of all pinch points, and you just know that a big boy is going to roll through there. But you sit there on November 7th, nothing. You sit there November 8th, nothing. You hunt the best bedding area in the area on November 9th, and there's nothing. And you don't get it. Like, what's going on? In that scenario, Jeff, when you're hunting what should be the best days of the year, and it's good conditions too. It's not like it's hot. It's nice, cool
right.
to cold weather, and you're hunting your best rut spots, and nothing for 3 or 4 days. What do you do then, Jeff? Do you stay in the spots because you know you have faith that eventually he'll roll through, or do you call an audible and totally change your plan?
That's I love that question because I try not to get into that situation in the first place because I'm really making the decision to use a stand. I'll give you an example. Like even in the early season, I can remember we traveled down from the UP to hunt in Wisconsin. It's a 7-hour drive, and it was early season. We had a great cold front, and I went out to a water hole that gives us a lot of rut activity and some of our best bucks the entire year, daylight pictures. So I went in there. Let's say it's October 5th. And And instead of being proactive, going back and changing the SD card, checking it out on the computer, walking 1.5 miles round trip, going back and forth to the truck, and we had time to do so, I just went right into the stand thinking it'd be okay. And I sat there just that one evening, pulled the cards. There hadn't been a shooter buck yet that year, and I feel like I wasted a set. And so whether I'm going by sign, current sign, scraping activity, like I said, I have a mock scrape at every bow stand location. And so you can tell just by tracks, if there's a big track there, if it's being worked, even if you didn't have a camera on it, you can tell by rubs, frequency of scraping, tracks in the area. So I'm trying to make it a situation where I'm not even hunting a stand unless I have good reason or intel to think that there's a buck that I want, or at least some activity in that spot to begin with. So if I sat in a spot for 3 or 4 days in a row, I'm definitely moving. Now, if I'm on public land, that's a different scenario, because then I'm hunting big rut movement, and I might be shooting a buck that's coming through every 4 or 5 days in that location. He might be 3 miles away when I go in and sit in that stand. So in a outstanding rut cruising funnel on public land, a lot of times it's more time in the stand, where on private land, it's more timing of the current activity in that stand. And if I don't see that activity, I'm definitely leaving and looking somewhere else, because that means there's a hot doe somewhere else. There's a combination of hot does, a family group. There's something that's drawing deer away from that position. And I do my best to go find that.
Yeah.
And make sure that I'm hunting at current signs. And so I'm very unforgiving when it comes to stand locations. If I think that it's dead, I'm immediately moving, and finding the next best stand. And that's why a lot of times I'm hunting completely different stands in the morning and the evening. I might hunt all day, but here I just had a dead stand. And you'll even see this in the morning. Like, you have a hot stand in the morning that's a dead stand in the afternoon. So a lot of times a great stand in the morning is not a great stand in the afternoon, and that's why I'm switching stands most of the time, unless I'm torturing myself watching a glowing knock all day because I just missed one.
Mm-hmm.
That's more of a stubborn personal thing. But yeah, I'm definitely staying mobile. And I'll, and just real quick, I know my buddy Carl down in Georgia, we hunted in Wisconsin for many years, Kentucky, Pennsylvania a couple times, Michigan. Really good hunting buddy. He'll actually be out to Minnesota to hunt public land out of my place this year, but we hunted the same land. He actually put in a little bit more time because he'd take an entire 9-day window off every year to hunt the rut, where I just go down and hunt the weather. And so during that, the 12 years we had the land, I shot 17 bucks out of 14 different stands. He shot 9 bucks out of 2 stands, 8 bucks out of 1. So he would live and die by that stand, almost like you're talking about. If it was dead, it was dead. He just kept hunting it. Where I was always looking for the next freshest stand. In fact, it got to a point when we were choosing stands, we always drew straws. We'd narrow it down to the handful of stands we thought were the best for the sit. And he'd always want to go hunt the horse pasture stand. And so that gave me another 20 stands to choose from. And so to me, it was always about finding the next freshest stand with sign. And so even, going a little bit out of your way and finding, going by this out of way stand, and you look over there and, wow, there's just fresh scrapes, there's fresh rubs, there's current sign, and then I'm going and sitting on that. Even though that stand initially might not have been my favorite, I always look at it like this is something I live by, is that your favorite stand should be the next stand you shoot a buck out of, not your last stand.
I like that. I like that a lot. So speaking of moving, one of the things that I always find myself in debating during a day is that scenario where you want to move from a morning stand to an evening stand. And you're trying to decide when the right time is to pull out and head out to the next spot. All things being equal, I know that if you were sitting at 11 o'clock and a big buck rolled through, you might sit longer and wait or whatever it is. But if you had to just pick, what's the perfect time, the best ideal time to make your move? If you have to go from a morning stand to a new evening stand, and we're talking somewhere in this rut time frame, which is kind of tricky because lots of times there can be that midday movement. When would you optimally pull down your set and move to the new spot, or climb out and move to another pre-hung set?
That's, I would say usually that average time frame. Now, how cold is it, Mark? Northwest instance where I'm staring into the wind and it's like 18 degrees and there's a 20-mile-an-hour wind, but it's a really good day. And I'm getting ready to get down at 11. But I would say between 11 and 1 is typically the time frame. And I'm kind of like you. You see a buck that goes through at 11. Well, if there's still some movement like that, I'm waiting another hour. But it's good to point out that a lot of these morning rut stands are bedding area related. If you think about it, that again, kind of going back to a good stand in the morning might not necessarily be a good stand in the evening. Evening stands relate to food sources. When you're sitting in a bedding area stand in the morning, it could be great till 1 or 2, bucks cruising. Eventually they lay up, they're taking a little siesta, break, and then they're heading towards food because every other deer, including those, are heading towards food in the evening. So as it gets closer to dark, deer are leaving your position in a morning bedding area stand instead of coming to your position. So you're less likely to see deer right before dark than you are 2 hours before dark. And so that's why it's a really good reason to flip and change stand spot.
Yeah. I found myself more and more often hunting something like you described, like a bedding focused type morning stand during the rut. But then wanting to stay there till that 2 or 3 o'clock window because those bedding areas still get visited during the midday window. And then I try to slip out like 2 or 3 o'clock when I think that midday, little possible burst is over. And then I relocate to my evening spot. But I'm always sitting there the whole time thinking, man, should I go sooner? Should I go later? Should I wait an hour longer? You drive yourself crazy thinking about it too much.
Yeah, and that's where I think, I like having a time. Like, so I'll just pick a random time, 1 or 2 o'clock, and then you just move. And so kind of methodically, you just don't think about it. Kind of, this is your plan. I think the more you stew about it, you can think of so many different scenarios. But you just pick a time, sit till that time. And then I look at it like, if I said I was going to get down at 1 and for some reason I cheat myself and get out at 5 to 1, let's say even I'm really cold and I spook a deer, that's on me. I was being lazy. I didn't stay till 1. Or if I stayed till 1 and I'm getting down and spook a deer, I spooked them, but that was the plan. I got out at 1, I stayed till 1, I did what I was supposed to in my head. And so you kind of, that's more forgivable to me than getting out of a stand early. So you just pick a time and kind of go with it. Kind of like whether it's planting food plots, your food plots fail, well, just throw some rye on it, don't sweat it, and enjoy the season. I guess I look at it like, too, there's just so many other things in life to stress about that for me, the fun is the whole system of coming up with the plan of, hunting here in the morning, here in the afternoon. I'm going to take this time, I'm going to move. And if bad things happen because you were moving or because you got down at that particular time you had chosen, just don't sweat it.
Yeah, it's at least for me, easier said than done. But I like the sentiment, but it always seems like I tell myself that in August, and then come November, I'm sweating it still.
Oh, how old are you, Mark?
They're 33 or 34, 33, one of the two, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I remember when you were a lot younger too. But I'm 51, and I think it's interesting. Last year when I shot my target buck in Minnesota, that's the buck I wanted. I was so excited. I went out to a stand on October 26th. It was the evening hunt. I suspected he would be there. I got in the stand, and the wind was iffy. And I only made it about 15, 20 minutes. I got down, went to another stand. And 2 days later, I shot him out of that stand. And that night when I was sitting there during daylight, that buck walked from that downwind approach. And I feel if I was in that stand, I would have spooked him. Maybe I wouldn't have got him for the entire season. And so that discipline at 51 is not the discipline I had when I was 30 or maybe 35 or certainly not 25. So it just becomes like you kind of have this stuff in your head. This is what I'm going to do. This is what works. This is what's worked in the past. And it's easy to develop that discipline over experience. So what I'm trying to say is, easier said than done. But if you do it for many years and that's what works, then a lot easier at 51 than 33 or 34.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm curious about this, and maybe you just told me the answer. That might have been the answer what you just told me right there. But when you look back at yourself at 33, you zoom back from 51 back to 33, and you look at those 18 years in between. What's the most important change you've made from my age to your age that has led to more success for you? If you could try to condense all the lessons you've learned, all the changes you've made, all the progress that has happened between then and now, and you could put your finger on one single thing, what would that be?
That less is more. And so what I mean by that, in 2006, I sat 110 times in 4 different states, or approximately 12 all-day sits over a 4-month period. And I shot 2 bucks. I passed up 50, 60 bucks, public lands in Michigan, Pennsylvania, private land too. And I don't feel like I burned myself out. I burned my stands out. And what I found is, like, a year like last, I had all these opportunities in Wisconsin, but I only sat maybe 15 times from October, November, December, and January in Wisconsin. I just picked really good times, maybe 18 times. But I had really, an opportunity every 3 or 4 sits at the most. And it was because I was picking the best times to go. I used, current sign and activity, and went in, and you expect a high rate of opportunity. Even in 2002, looking back, or 2003, looking back, 18 years or whatever, I can remember I put a lot more emphasis on hunting the peak of the rut and hunting a 5 or 6 day window, where I've learned that to take those 5 days and spread them out over the entire rut and pick the best days to hunt was more valuable than taking 5 days off in a row, certainly 9 days in a row, because I can pick and choose. And not everyone can do that, but a lot of people can say, for example, I'd rather, if I had to pick my time off well in advance, I'd say, okay, I'm going to take these 3 long weekends in a row. And I'm just picking dates. I don't even know what they are this year, but let's say it was the 25th of October, the 2nd of November, and the 9th of November. I'd rather pick 3-day weekends. And then if you're really lucky, your employer could say, I could say, can I let you know if I'm going to take Monday off or Friday off for this long weekend? But even then, I'd rather spread out my impact on the land and hunt fresher stands in a methodical approach like that, where you say, I'm just going to hunt these 3 weekends, long weekends, whether it's a 3 or 4 day weekend, and take my chances spread out like that, and trying to put all my eggs into one basket, thinking that the more days I hunt in a row, the more opportunity I have. So less is more. Certainly, over the years, my sits per opportunity have decreased drastically. In 2006, that was 110 sits for $2. What's that? I'm not saying I didn't have any other opportunities, but that was 50 sits per buck, or 55 sits per buck. That's a lot of sits per buck. Now it's down more to like 4 to 6, depending where I'm hunting, per buck. And that's because I'm being more timely. And for that, then I get to hunt more states, I feel like. I'm not burning out stands. I get to hunt a longer amount of time. I get to learn more because I'm in the field for a more extended amount of time. I'm just not hunting as much. Even if I sat 45 times, that might be over 3 or 4 states over a 4-month period. When you do the math, it's not many sits per week.
Yeah. So, gosh, I don't know. Time's flying by, Jeff, and I'm getting old really fast. But I think you and I did a podcast. You're
still young.
So you say. Yeah. These two kids, the 1 and 3-year-old, make me feel a lot older. But you and I did a podcast together. I should know this off the top of my head, but I'm guessing it was 2015. 2016, so something like 5 years or so ago, in which we spent a lot of time diving into your theories around the best days to hunt, choosing which of these days you're going to be selective about. And I know you've spent a lot, you've shared a lot on your YouTube channel, and you've done articles about this, and there's a lot. You kind of have an algorithmic approach to choosing the days that have the highest odds of success. But what I'm wondering about is how your thoughts, if at all, have changed since 2015, when we did this 2-hour conversation diving deep into your theories at that point. So from 2015 to 2021, has anything changed in how you predict the best days to hunt? Is there anything different now, or that you view as more important or less important than back 5-6 years ago?
Yeah, there's a couple things. And what's interesting is when we talked about that in 2015, I think that was around the time that I wrote that rut article for
Exactly.
Outdoor Life.
Yes.
And that was that November rut issue. And what's interesting is that kind of forced me to put my numbers down on paper. And that's why I'm going to meet the HuntWise crew, right now for dinner tonight, and we're shooting a bunch of videos tomorrow because they infuse that algorithm into their HuntCast formula. And that's just been an incredible journey over the last year and a half. But I hunted that way for, since the early 90s. And so it's been really focusing on weather change, especially temperature drop. And so what's really changed, I think, during that time is one of the things I noticed is that, just kind of an add-on is that when things change and they get really calm, where there's no wind, I find that no wind isn't necessarily a good thing. You do seem like there's, a moderate amount of wind is a good thing. And I have noticed that throughout the years. Also, it's relative. Like if you have 40-mile-an-hour winds and it drops to 20 miles an hour, deer notice that change. 20 is still pretty windy. But if it drops from 25 miles an hour to 5 miles an hour, there's still that same change. So I think it's all relative. Same with temperature change. I think in the early days, I used to focus on, when it's in the high 20s, the end of October, I really need to be in the woods. But if you just had a string of 70, 69, 71, 71, 68, 71 again for 5 or 6 days in a row, and then all of a sudden it's a high of 52, even if it's early November and that's warm for that time of year, it's still a huge drop in temperature. And really that 18-degree overall drop in temperature for daytime highs, is it really that much different of an impact if it's a temperature drop from an average of 48 to 30? And I don't think it is. And so wind speed change, temperature change, it's all relative, I think. And then at the same time, barometric pressure. I used to pay attention to barometric pressure a little bit with thinking, where barometric pressure was high, temperatures the lowest it's in those two. That's always a great day to hunt. Those are easy to pick out of the forecast. When the barometric pressure and temperature meet, deer will be on their feet. A client of mine, Jared Archer, made up that saying a few years ago. I thought that was kind of cool. But the barometric pressure can lie. And so I look at it like deer, they're outside, obviously, 365, and they relate to tangible changes in the weather, whether that's a change in wind speed, the moisture in the air, change in wind direction, obviously the extremities of the weather and volatility of the weather. They relate to all that. And so what I notice is that you could have a big drop in temperature, a big subsiding of the weather conditions that brought about that change. And the barometric pressure is low because just 2 days later, there's a front coming through. It's a double front for that week. And so the barometric pressure is low, yet if you missed that time to be in the woods, you just had a 17-degree temperature drop. The winds went from 40 to 21 miles an hour. You had thunderstorms. Now there's no rain. It's been dry for several hours. If you miss that day, you're missing one of the top 10 days to be in the woods all year. At the same time, 2 days later, everything subsides. The temperature bottoms out. Barometric pressure is high. Outstanding time to hunt. But 2 days later, the pressure could be higher, even though it's 10 degrees warmer. And that's a case where even though the pressure is high, if you're going by a high pressure, barometric pressure reading, that's going to give you a false positive, meaning that the best day was just 2 days earlier when the temperature bottomed out and the conditions cleared. And a lot of that goes back to, too, even feeding. You go back to that deer feeding 5 times in a 24-hour period. And I talked a lot about this in that Outdoor Life article in 2015, that if deer are pressured back in their bedding areas because they're stressed out and they don't want to move because of the extremity of weather, they're missing quality feeding times and quality feeding opportunities. So as soon as that weather breaks, they want to put the feed back on. But just like you or I, if we were lost in the wilderness and we didn't have anything to eat for 5 days, the first thing we do when we get rescued is we pig out. But do you pig out the second day and the third day? And so once you pass that second day, third day, after that weather changes, that feeding influence and that binge feeding to replenish their bellies. And you think about it, when a storm goes through, they're stressed out, so they're losing energy, just pure stress. Even in Minnesota, they rerouted snowmobile trails around deer yards because they found that would extend the amount of energy that deer could actually expend throughout the wintertime to actually relate to saving their life. You know, it might add days at the end of the winter, harsh winter, to their life because those snowmobiles aren't going by and taking energy away just by stress. So when a front goes through deer, there's loud noises, it's windy, they're burning energy for stress. And then on top of that, it's getting colder. So they're burning energy to stay alive and keep warm. And then third, the big one is they're missing quality feeding opportunities. They might be stuck in their beds for 5, 6, 7 feedings in a row. So when that happens, it's kind of a triple whammy where they just want to feed as soon as that breaks. And so, you know, as it relates to barometric pressure, to me, it's more related to their loss of energy, the stress levels they receive. They want to feed immediately after it breaks, and who cares what the level is at that point. And that's how I think you can have the same barometric pressure level and there's a snowstorm coming. Deer, we've all seen it where deer are feeding out in the field. It's, you know, kind of a light, packy snow that's coming down. It's 1, 2 inches, 3 inches. And deer just feeding out in the field. They're running around like they have no care in the world. But if there's a blizzard coming, they don't even leave their bedding areas, and you could have the same barometric pressure reading at that time. And moisture in the air, the amount of wind speed, maybe temperature change, whatever it might be, they know to stay back in their beds or go out into the fields and feed, even though you have relatively the same pressure reading. So again, they're reacting to pure tangibles, and that's something that I've really focused in on. And it's kind of like, you know, in 2018, I wrote my last book, that All-Weather Whitetails. And so at that time, as really, it was a good opportunity to write and really not focus on barometric pressure and just be really clean about that algorithm approach. And I feel like when you take the barometric pressure out of the equation, it makes things make a lot more sense for when deer actually move and when they don't, because you're eliminating a lot of false positives and false negatives.
Man, this is exactly the kind of exactly the kind of just different level of insight that I always know I'm going to get with you, Jeff, that I always enjoy, because you and I are both, in the best possible way, we are both super nerds. We love to geek out on these little details. And I always know when I get you on the phone, I'm going to have a like-minded soul that I can get into this stuff with, and I love it. But I know you've got... I
like talking to you. You know, it's fun.
It's the best. But I know you've got to get rolling here pretty soon to your evening meeting, and I've got to go too. So I want to shift to just a rapid-fire couple questions here to wrap this up. And it's going to be a handful of questions. Just give me a one-word answer to these 5 quick ones, and then we're going to shut it down. So some of the stuff we've talked about over the years, some of this we haven't. But let's just see what you think on these. Just first thing off the top of your head. So are you ready for the rapid fire session?
I think I am.
Okay. All right. Does the moon matter to deer movement? Yes or no?
Yes, for morning feeding opportunities.
That was more than one word, but I'll give you a pass, Jeff. Would you?
It was still short though.
It was short. Would you take a 50-yard shot at a whitetail with your bow? Yes or no?
Yes.
If you could only have one of these tools for the rest of your hunts, would it rather be a set of rattling antlers or a grunt tube? You can only have one.
Grunt tube.
All right. Expandable or fixed blade broadheads for the rest of your life. Which one?
Hybrid.
That's cheating, but okay.
You meant to ask that one too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I really do like those hybrids.
All right. Should you stop a buck with some kind of sound before shooting with a bow? Yes or no?
Most of the time. Say yes.
Okay. All right. Now, I know you've got farms in Minnesota and Wisconsin, so this one's going to be tough. Which state has better deer hunters, Minnesota or Wisconsin?
I'm not going to answer that one. I'll offend two people. I don't. Can I expand on this slightly?
Yeah. I'll give you the pass.
really have a lot of respect for the wilderness type hunters. And when you get into northern Minnesota and some of those wilderness type settings, northern Wisconsin can be really rough, brutal wilderness, but the expansive amount of the wilderness in Minnesota and the people that consistently pull big bucks, mature bucks out of that area without the aid of food or anything, they're just going in and hunting them. I have, mad respect for them.
Yeah, that is no easy task.
That's not even Wisconsin or Minnesota hunters in general. It's just that's a pretty cool area. And I know some people that pull some monsters out of there, and they do it consistently with nothing more than their woodsmanship and hunting experience and a backpack.
Yeah. All right, so this can be a longer answer, a little bit longer answer, but here's one last scenario. Let's say I control the world. I rule the world. I get to make all the decisions. And I'm going to tell you, Jeff, that you cannot deer hunt for 10 years. I'm going to take away your deer hunting privileges for 10 years unless you can kill a 5-year-old buck this year. So if you kill a 5-year-old buck this year, you can keep on hunting. But if you don't pull it off, you're done for 10 years. But here's the rub. You only get 1 day to kill that 5-year-old buck, and you get 1 stand location. So you have a very high stakes hunt. Tell me the date that you're going to choose for this hunt and describe to me the tree stand you're going to hunt for this very important hunt.
That's interesting because, we own our acreage in Minnesota. It's 245 acres. I do talk about that. So, basically a lifetime so far to get to that point. We have lots of stands, lots of activity. I have a long history of hunting in Wisconsin, even on that small parcel. I think this will be my 8th season. It's going to be November 5th. And it'll be on a ridge top in Wisconsin on that small parcel, adjacent to a really nice bedding area that's difficult to get into that stand. And it's kind of in an X and a hub of movement. And I can blow my scent off either side of the ridge and even down the ridge because it slopes down. And I'm going to get into that stand about just in time because I need to rely on thermals to carry my scent away in the morning hours. So if I get in there hour before light, there's a good chance that a buck, if they're in that area, could be downwind to me with the thermals just sinking down below me, where that's not going to happen at daybreak when the sun starts rising and things heat up. So, and I'm going to sit in that stand right there all the way till dark, just sit in that one stand, and that would be where I'd take my chance on that small parcel, on a person that I know and love. And not to say that there's not motive, but I guess it's the history and knowing some of those bucks pretty intimately in the area, and that's where I'd take my chance.
All right. I like it, and I like your chances. I bet it'd work out for you, Jeff. I enjoyed this. I always appreciate our chats, and I appreciate your time making this work on the drive. So, Jeff, you have made it through the What Would You Do gauntlet.
Nice. And I'm almost through Chicago fully, so that's a good thing, too.
I'm glad that we could help pass the time through that sometimes miserable stretch of I-80 or 90 or 94, whichever bit you're on. So, man, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the time. This has been great.
Mark, it's always enjoyable talking to you, and I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this one. Be sure to go check out all of Jeff's content. He does great work. You can find it at the whitetailhabitatsolutions.com website. You can go to the Whitetail Habitat Solutions YouTube channel. He's got a great set of online courses right now on his website too, that if you're trying to go deeper into some of these topics, that will absolutely help you do it. So check it all out. Check out his books. Like I mentioned, they're all worth your time and energy. So with all that out of the way, appreciate you spending time here. I hope you enjoyed this one. I learned a lot. Jeff always is a guy that I can take something away from. So hoping you're feeling the same way. And until next time, thank you and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
As you know, the Meat Eater live tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.